everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Ask A Prof session this Friday. So my name's Elena. I am a coordinator with the Active Minds program here at UNBC, and I'm also going to be your host today. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli. We want to thank them for allowing us to work, play, and learn on their territories today. I would also like to thank our mastermind presenting sponsor, the BC Oil and Gas Commission, as well as our other amazing sponsors, Radloff, Triton, New Gold, RBC, and the Michael Reed Law Corporation. So I am joined today by a very special guest. We've got UNBC's Interim President, Dr. Geoff Payne, joining us today. He's going to be doing some cool experiments with us and talking all about the heart and the cardiovascular system as well. So we can't wait to get started. We'll finish off our live stream today with a Q&A. So if you have any questions for Dr. Payne, you can submit them in the comment section of this live stream and we will answer them at the end for you. That's all I have to say. That's all of our introductions. So I will get out of the way. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Payne here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Elena, and also want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional territory of the Lheidli today. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you this afternoon. The opportunity to talk about the heart, the blood, the cardiovascular system, and as Elena said, I do have a couple of things to show you today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions at the end. So to kind of start, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about, how I got into, thinking about the heart and the cardiovascular system. So I'm a physiologist, and what a physiologist is I'm interested in understanding how the human body works. Everything from the brain, to the heart, to the liver, to the muscles, and everything that encompasses the human body. And really trying to understand how everything works. And then from there, when things don't work, like when we get sick sometimes and those types of things, trying to understand what went wrong and how we can then put it back together to make it good again, so to speak, and to be normal physiology. The focus of this afternoon is going to be on the heart, blood, and really the two most important things around that are the blood, which is very important, obviously, to keep us going. And then the most important thing in terms of blood is how we get the blood around the human body, and that is going to be the heart. The heart is a very complex organ. It is a very muscle, and when it's working, if you can put your hand on your chest and you can feel your heart beat, it beats about every 800 milliseconds, and it's a big sort of muscle that sort of squeezes and moves the blood around. And we'll talk about how the blood moves throughout the body and the importance of why it moves in the direction that it does. But first, I thought we'd start with a demonstration, really looking at what makes up blood. And to start with that, we're going to really look at the main components of blood. Now, there's lots of different things that go into the blood. When you really think about the main things, you're talking about the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets, and then what kind of holds that together is the plasma that allows the blood then to move throughout the body. And what the blood is really doing is, think of it as a highway in terms of moving through our blood vessels, both our arteries and veins, and we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about how blood moves and when the heart contracts and pumps the blood around the body. So let's start with the first demonstration then. So what I'm going to do is take a glass jar like this, and think of this as your blood vessel, empty blood vessel. And there's blood vessels that go everywhere, from the tips of your fingers to the tips of your toes. And you need that because what blood is doing is carrying oxygen and nutrients to our body in order to keep whatever part of the body that it's sort of perfusing to alive, whether that's your liver, whether that's muscles, whether that's the brain. And so you need blood vessels as the highway to carry the blood. So think of this as our blood vessel, empty blood vessel. So the first main component of blood, red blood cells. So we've got here some red candy, I think they're cinnamon hearts or something along those lines, and that's going to represent our red blood cells. Red blood cells are probably the most predominant cell that is in blood. So what we're going to do to represent that is we're going to take our red blood cells and pour them in. And there's quite a few in there. The interesting fact about red blood cells is they replenish every 120 days or so. And so when the blood that we have in there now, the red blood cells, is not the same red blood cells that we've had since birth. They need to replenish, continue to be healthy, and so that they can do what they do, which is carry the oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. So we've begun to fill up our blood vessel here now. So we've got our red blood cells in there. The next important one is our white blood cells. Now, white blood cells are really important sometimes when we get sick. So I'm sure everybody that's on the live stream today has had the flu or the cold or something like that. And in order for our bodies to fight that infection that's happening is these very important cells called white blood cells. Now, they're not as many in the sort of the blood themselves because we're not always sick. So a little bit less into our blood vessel here than what we have with our red. So you can see we've got a lot of red in there, and we've got a little bit of white in there to represent our white blood cells. The third most important sort of cell that's found in our blood is platelets. Now, when we're looking at the size of them, you can see we've got a lot more red cells. We've got a little bit less white cells. The white cells are much bigger than the red cells, but the small ones, the next ones, are platelets. And so we're going to use some rice here, and we're going to pour that in there as well. Whoop. And so now in our blood vessel, we have red blood cells, we've got white blood cells, and we've got platelets. So as I said, the red blood cells carry the oxygen and the nutrients. The white blood cells are there to fight off infection. And then the platelets are really important for when we cut ourselves, to clot. And the importance of that is, so we've scraped ourselves from time to time, and we've got a little bit of blood that you can see. But then, as you notice, as a little bit over time, that it starts to stop bleeding and sort of gets a scab formed over it. And what's doing that is our platelets. The importance for the platelets and sort of creating that seal is it then allows the body to heal itself. So it closes up the scrape, the blood stops flowing out, the platelets do its job to create a sort of a scab, and then the body can begin to heal itself. So now we have, in our blood vessel, we have our three main cells, red, white, and our platelets. But that's going to be really hard to move through the body just like that. So we need a sort of medium in order to sort of carry the blood cells through our blood vessels. And what's going to do that is plasma. And so what we have here is some corn syrup, and we're going to pour that into our blood vessel, like so. It's really goopy. And there's quite a bit of it in there. So now what we have, as you can see, we've got what was once our empty blood vessel filled with red blood cells, which carry oxygen and nutrients to all the parts of our body to keep them alive and healthy. We've got our white blood cells, which are there to fight off infections. And then we've got our platelets that are there to clot and to prevent and start healing, prevent any blood sort of loss when you scrape yourself. And now we've got our plasma that holds it all together, and that's going to allow those cells to move throughout the body. And we're going to talk about the heart in a second and how it pumps and moves the blood around in a second. So if we had the ability to take a blood vessel out of our body right now and look at it without having anything leak out either side, this is what you would see. You would see the plasma there, you would see the red, the white, and the platelets, and that is what makes up our blood. Now what's really interesting, as I said, when things happen, that you're going to get a change in the number of the number of cells that are in the blood. So let's say we get sick right now. Let's say we've got the cold. What you would see then, if you could take out your blood, and you would see more white blood cells than you would normally see there. And the reason for that is your body's fighting off an infection, and then when the infection is no longer there, the white blood cells would go back to normal. Sometimes when you've had to go in and get a blood test, and they check the number of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and other cells that are found in blood, they can determine, based on the number of cells that they're seeing, whether you've had an infection or something along that, or your body's fighting off something. The other interesting thing, as I said, so it's not just the blood, it is also the communication of allowing your blood vessels to take that blood and all of its components around the body. And if you ever thought about, let's say you're running and your muscles are working and everything like that, how does your muscles know to say, hey, I need more blood, I need more oxygen, I need more nutrients, I'm really, really active? And what's really interesting, in the walls of the blood vessels themselves are almost like little tiny doors that you would then open and say, hey, I need more blood down here, we're really, really active. And that would send a signal up to the bigger vessels in your body. They would open and more blood would come down. And so that communication is really important. So the blood vessels themselves can communicate and say, hey, we need more of red blood cells, we need more white blood cells, we need more platelets. So it's not just by chance that these things happen. It really is a coordinated effort for your blood and the blood vessels themselves, like the highway, to carry the blood around the body. The other interesting thing about blood vessels and the blood in them, think about this, and then I'll ask the question and then somebody give it to me at the end. We've got all of our blood vessels, as I said, right from the tops of your fingers all the way down to your toes, blood vessels everywhere to supply that oxygen-rich blood and or white blood cells or platelets, depending on what's happening, throughout the body. I said they communicate. The question I have for you that I want somebody to answer at the end is, are all of our blood vessels open all the time? So you think about that, and at the end somebody's got to give me the either yes or no. You've got two options, and then I'll tell you why depending on the answer you give me. So that's our blood. We've got our blood vessels. That's the highway that takes the blood around the body. But what is the mechanism of which we get the blood throughout the entire body? And that is our heart. The heart is a very unique muscle in that it's not just one muscle. It is made up of chambers. It's made up of atrium and ventricles. And it's really important that the atrium and the ventricles are separated so that they can actually continue to do the work and move the blood around the body in one loop. You do not want your blood to go backwards. It's got to go in one direction. And the reason for that is, as I said, your heart's going to beat every 800 milliseconds or less. I'm going to check my heart rate right now. My heart is beating at 100 beats a minute here right now. And that's really cool with technology now. I can actually check my heart rate. So my heart is beating every minute now 100 times a minute. So that's my heart rate. And so my heart is pumping, 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 and it's pushing blood out through the biggest vessel in the human body, which is the aorta, and then down to the rest of the blood vessels in the body. Remember the question, are all of our blood vessels open all the time? What's really important for that, as I said, it's got to go in one direction. And the reason for that is when the blood that's in our blood vessels, with our red blood cells, our white blood cells, and our platelets, but more importantly right now, with the oxygen-carrying red blood cells, if they don't go in one direction, you'd think then, well, if they move backwards, they're not going to be able to get all the blood down to where it needs to be, either when we're active, like I said, when we're running, or to keep one of your organs going, like your liver or your lungs or things like that. So you want the blood going in one direction. And so what happens when your heart contracts, blood goes out into the aorta, carrying all that oxygen-rich blood, but what is it going to do with all that oxygen? Well, it's got to give it away. The oxygen and the nutrients that are carried by the red blood cells need to go to all, as I said, to all of the different parts of the body in order to keep it alive. But as it gives its oxygen away, well, it's got no oxygen left. So your red blood cell that's floating around in our blood vessels starts to lose its oxygen as it moves to where it needs to go. So now what does it do? Well, it's got to come back to the heart. And so it comes back towards the heart into one of the 4 chambers, which is, in this case, one of the atrium. Then it goes into the ventricle. As the heart contracts, that now blood that has less oxygen now, because what has it done? It's given it all away, goes up into the lungs. And then as we breathe, this is the coordination between our lungs and our heart now. So as we breathe in oxygen, the blood that's going through the lungs now has the ability to take up that oxygen, comes back into the heart, on the other side of the heart, into the atrium, into the left ventricle, and then the heart contracts, and now that oxygen-rich blood goes back out and does it again every 800 or so milliseconds, or in my case, as I've said, my heart rate is at 100 right now. Got a really neat experiment to sort of demonstrate that. So if you're going to do this wherever you are today, so get 2 mason jars here. And with the 2, you're going to need 2 mason jars, you're going to need a balloon, and you're going to need 2 straws. So what you're going to do is basically cut the top off a balloon and stretch that over the mason jar, and that represents a closed system right now. Each of the straws here that are fitting into the mason jar are sort of poked through, and then you're going to tape one end with what's left over what you cut off that balloon. And what this represents is the circulatory system in the one direction. So I'm going to try it, I'm going to see if you can see it. I'm just going to move my stuff out the way so you can actually see this, and you can, there you go, you can see it. All right, so my heart is going to beat and the blood's going to go. But what's really interesting now, I want you to focus on the other straw now, the one that's not squirting the blood, so to speak. What's not coming out? Nothing's coming out. And what this represents is a valve. So as the blood is pumped from one chamber to the other, the 4 chambers in the heart, a valve shuts closed. And when that valve closes, the blood can't go back the other way. So in the case of the aorta, when the heart goes from the left ventricle, contracts out to the aortic valve opens, all the blood goes out, then closes, and the blood can't come back. And as I said, the importance of that is to make sure that the blood is always going in one direction. You never want to go in the other way. Now, there are times out there when people have problems with their heart valves and they do become what's called leaky. And when they're leaky, that means the blood moves a little bit back. And the problem with that is, as I said, oxygenated blood is not going to then be able to get in the one direction that we want it to go. And with that, then, whatever the blood, muscle, liver, whatever that is getting that blood is not going to get as much oxygen because the oxygen-rich blood is going backwards, and people feel tired and those types of things. So you want to make sure that your blood is always going in that direction. As I said, I'll demonstrate again. You can see it's going and not coming back up the other. And that's exactly how the heart works in pumping that. So, just to kind of recap our sort of 2 demonstrations. Blood. 3 main cells. Red blood cells carry the oxygen and the nutrients. White blood cells, which are less in number than the red blood cells, fight off infection. And the little dot ones in there, the platelets, are the ones that help for clotting when we have a cut or a scrape. And they won't move throughout the body in those blood vessels unless they've got some sort of medium. And in this case, it's plasma, and we would use corn syrup to sort of mimic that. If you were to go to a lab at the hospital and you've had your blood test, and then they take your blood and they spin it down to kind of then be able to test how much red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets are in the blood, you would actually see it separate where you have mostly this plasma, which kind of looks kind of yellowish as it separates out, leaving the cells and leaving the plasma. And then they can kind of test what's in your blood. So that's the blood going through all the arteries in our body. The heart pumps that blood through all the arteries, which is giving away our oxygen. As it moves back towards the heart to get more oxygen, because it's giving it away, it now comes through not arteries, but veins. And the way to tell the difference between the two is the arteries are red. Why are they red? If you saw them on your hands or anything like that. So you can see on me I've got sort of red and sort of like a bluish. So the red has the oxygen-rich blood in it. The sort of the bluish, which is the veins, doesn't have any oxygen-rich blood anymore because it's giving it away and it's going back towards the heart. Arteries go away from the heart with all the oxygen-rich blood. Veins go back towards the heart with all the deoxygenated blood, ready to go into the heart, pumped up into the lungs. Breathe, oxygen, heart pumps, and we redo the cycle again every day, every 800 milliseconds. So that's our heart, and the one direction, this is the blood. What I'd like to do now is kind of stop, take some questions. Now somebody's got to answer my question now. As I said to you, blood vessels, which are carrying all of our blood throughout the body, are everywhere. There's nowhere where there's not a blood vessel. But my question to the group was, are all of our blood vessels open all the time? Are they carrying blood all the time? So I can't see the answers. So
yeah, so maybe we'll do a few questions while everyone puts their votes in. Yep, and then we will come back.
Yeah, can you do a poll?
Yeah, yeah, we can do like a tally of the responses. Absolutely.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so for a few questions in the meantime, we're going to start with some heart questions that we've had received for you. So, Gregory from our Academy of Science Club would like to know, why is the heart not in charge of the body?
Gregory, great question. Really, I mean, when people think of who's in charge of the body and how to make it run, we always think of the brain that sort of drives as the sort of central command that drives everything. But really, you know, without the heart, the body doesn't work. And without the brain, the body doesn't work. So really, the brain drives it, but the heart is really the most important organ. It's in charge of the blood movement throughout the body. The brain tells the heart what it needs to do, but in terms of in charge, the heart drives everything to do with blood.
Perfect.
Great question.
Our Before the Ice Age campers wonder, how many liters of blood does your heart pump every day? So to give you a little bit of context here, they guessed 8 liters. So what do you think?
You'd have to multiply that by a lot. So you think, you know, there's 4 to 6 liters of blood in the human body at any given time. So every time the heart pumps, it gets most of its blood out and then through. So you think how many times your heart is going to beat in the run of a day, and multiply that by, say, 4 to 6, 7 liters of blood, and that'll tell you. So 8 was a good guess, but you need to add a lot more in terms of how much it pumps in the run of a day, which is why it works so hard and why it's such an important muscle. And you know, it really needs to continue to work. The other interesting thing about the heart that I'll tell you, because you know, I talked about oxygen, you know, going from the heart, oxygen-rich blood going to all the different parts of the body to keep them alive. The heart's a muscle too. So the heart also has blood vessels that supply it in order to keep it going. And so if it can't get its own rich oxygenated blood back to the heart itself, it doesn't work as properly as well. So we've got to make sure that the heart is also getting that oxygen-rich blood, in addition to giving it to everywhere else.
Awesome. Next question here from Sophia. She would like to know, why does your heart beat so fast when you're running? So, great question, Sophia. So, and it kind of ties a little bit into my question I asked all of you, but the reason your heart beats so fast is because if I'm standing here right now, I'm at rest. So my muscles aren't working, you know, I'm just in a sort of a steady state. But if I really start to move right now, the leg muscles are going to say, hey, in steady state, the blood that you were giving me is not enough when I'm starting to move right now, so I need more blood, I need more oxygen, I need more nutrients, so my legs can work and be able to run fast. So in order to do that, it sends that signal, as I said, up through the vessels, communicates and say, hey, my leg muscles are more active, we need to send more blood.
So the heart's going to go, we need more blood to the leg muscles. We've got to beat faster to get more blood out to feed those legs that are now running.
Great, I'm sure that answered Sophia's question. She'll be happy. Next one from Orion. Why does a baby's heart beat so much faster than an adult's?
That is a great question, and it has to do in development of babies. So as we're an adult, we hit that sort of steady state in terms of how fast the heart needs to beat in order to sort of continue to maintain our steady state as adults. And babies, there's so much rapid development that's going. You think in terms of, you know, looking at a baby and looking at them 2 months later and looking at them 2 months later, how much they develop over time. And so the heart is working extra more at that point in order to sort of keep up with that demand. So that's why there is a little bit more of a rapid heartbeat with babies versus adults.
Great, and we'll just go through one more question before we reveal the results of your question. But Sophia sent in another question, and she would like to know, how big is a kid's heart versus an adult's heart?
Well, kids' hearts are a little bit smaller to start, obviously, because kids are much smaller than adults. But that's not to say that as we age, our heart muscle will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is a point in time where the muscle hits its quote-unquote steady state. And for us as adults, it's about the size of your fist. So if you look at your fist, that's about the size of your heart. And so as babies, they're obviously smaller because babies are smaller, but as they grow, the heart grows because it's working like your muscles, and it will get bigger until it reaches about that fist size.
Perfect. All right, so to answer your question, the results are a little bit mixed, but overall the consensus is that they do not stay open.
That is good. So absolutely right. And the reason for that ties into, who asked the question about running? Was it Sophia?
Sophia, yes.
So Sophia, your question really leads into why all of our blood vessels are not open all the time. So if we think about running right now, so I'm standing here, my legs are not moving, and so yes, there are a number of blood vessels that are feeding into my leg muscles in order to keep the leg muscles going and everything like that, but I'm not moving them right now. And so if all of the blood vessels were open all the time, full capacity working, if I started to run then there would be no reserve in order to drive my now active muscles. And so what would happen was I'd start to run and the body would be like, well, there's nothing left to give. Everything's open, there's no more blood that we can get there, there's no more oxygen, nutrients, your muscles are done. And so you wouldn't be able to run. So in our bodies, there will be blood vessels that actually look completely closed like that. And you would go, oh my God, they mustn't be alive or anything. But as soon as they become active in response to a stimulus like running or something like that, they will open up and blood will come in, oxygen in that red blood cells, drive those muscles and keep them active. So absolutely, not all of them are open all the time, and we need that extra demand that we can call on when needed. Great answers.
Another question submitted on our social media by Sean. He asks, is there anything we can do to help keep our heart healthy?
Well, the heart's a muscle, so you've got to use it. And so whether that's going for walks, riding your bike, going for runs, keeping your heart active is a way to keep it healthy. The other way is fuel. So making sure that we're eating right, and I know there's people eating right, but absolutely good fuel feeds our muscles, and that keeps them active as well and keeps them healthy as well. The reason that bad food, so to speak, is bad for our heart and other parts of our body is if we're eating bad food all the time, we get little buildups in our vessels with fat and things like that, and they actually get smaller. So if this is what you want your blood vessels in your body and in your heart to look like. And so if we are eating unhealthy and not active, what happens is, just think of the vessel, see if you can see it now, it's nice and open then, but if we look down in a vessel that wasn't healthy, then there might be like little bumps and little deposits there. So if that's the case, the blood can't get all the way through nice and easy. And as I said to you, the heart is also a muscle, so if it's not getting enough oxygen due to bits that are not supposed to be in your vessels, then that puts a strain on the heart. So the heart has to work extra hard then to sort of overcome not getting enough oxygen-rich blood for itself, and over time, that damages your heart. So that's why it's very important to eat healthy and also exercise to keep your heart healthy.
Sort of related to that, actually, Emmy asks, what has a worse impact on our heart, stress or poor diet?
That's a great question, Emmy. I would say, they're all feeding into that. There are the healthy diet, as we just talked about a second ago, helps keep our heart healthy as well as exercise. Stress releases a number of different chemicals in the body, one being called cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And cortisol in high enough levels also damages our blood vessels. And so if you're highly stressed, increased cortisol damage the blood vessels, and it's very similar to what I talked about with little plaque buildup in response to an unhealthy diet. The cortisol doesn't do that, but it does damage the vessels. So if the vessels are damaged, we talk about, remember, communication when we were talking about running, we talk about sending signals up. So if we're damaging our vessels, the stress and the cortisol can also hurt them as well. So I would say not one more than the other, they just impact us negatively in different ways.
Great, and a pertinent question to the world today. Matt submitted a question. He asks, if blood helps us get better, why can't it help with COVID-19?
Well, Max, it is helping us with COVID-19. So COVID-19 is an infection, and we need to be able to fight off the infection. So the blood, and if you remember, what is the most important blood cell type in response to infection, and that is the white blood cells. And so what the white blood cells are doing is, in people that have COVID, you will see increased number of white blood cells trying to fight off the infection. The problem is that, depending on how much virus you were exposed to and your own sort of personal situation will determine how your body will react to fighting off that infection. But the blood is playing a very important role, in particular the white blood cells in the blood, in terms of fighting off that infection. Great question.
And I think this is our last heart-related question. So Andrea asks, can the number of red and white blood cells along with platelets change over time?
You can change, maybe not necessarily the number. Obviously, white blood cells, yes. So if you're fighting off infection, as I said, you are going to increase the number of white blood cells for sure. If you have a large cut or a large wound or things like that, the body can increase the number of platelets in order to create, blocking that cut and beginning to form the scab so we can have healing. The red blood cells, what you can do is you can increase the number, but you can also increase the oxygen carrying capability of your red blood cells. And so by being in certain altitudes and things like that, will increase the number, the ability of your red blood cells to carry oxygen, so that when you were at lower levels like sea level, you actually feel better at first because you have more oxygen carrying capability of your red blood cells. And as I said, over time, there is that turnover, so it's not the same red, white, or platelet cells in our blood. Great questions.
Very cool. So we'll move on to some other questions that we have received for you. So David from our Junior Med Club would like to know, how long could intestines stretch if they were laid out straight?
So there's two parts of the intestine, is the small and the large. And the large is about, I think it's about 20, and the small is about 5. I have to go back and check that fact. But they do stretch out quite a long ways. If you looked at a sort of a Google picture of your intestines, they kind of do this. And so if you were to stretch them out, probably about 25 in total between the large and the small.
Another question from David. Why do we feel cold when we have a fever and we're actually hot?
That's just the way that you feel in response to your body fighting off that infection. So even though you might feel cold and you've got the shivers and everything like that, but you've actually checked your temperature, it would be higher than normal, say 38 degrees Celsius. But it's just the way your body is fighting off that infection, gives you the impression that you are feeling cold with that shivers.
Sophia submitted another question for you. Why are kids' bones stronger than adult bones? And a second part to that, how many bones do babies have?
So the first part, in terms of why the baby's bones are stronger than adult bones, it is just as we age, the sort of the material and the cells that help keep our bones healthy and strong just begin to wear down over time, and so that just makes bones a little bit more brittle, which is why you got to. It's similar to the question about keeping your heart active. You got to keep moving and everything like that, because the pressure on our bones, particularly our legs, and that keeps them strong and everything like that. So as babies, obviously they're not as old as us because they're babies, and there's differences in terms of the strength of and the health of the bones that way. In terms of the number, babies have about 100 more bones than adults. It's about 200 to 300, and the reason for that as babies grow, not all the bones have completely joined together, and so as we age, those fuse, and then we're left with about 200 or so as an adult.
Very cool. Orion asks, what is inside bones that helps them fuse together after a fracture?
So there's a number of different types of cells, not dissimilar to the cells we have in our blood, different types of cells, but the bones are made up with a number of different cells, osteocytes, chondrocytes, and things like that. So as we've broken the bone and coming back together, as we've sort of pulled it together, these cells sort of begin to work and reform what was lost during the fracture. It's never as strong as what it was before the fracture, but it is enough to kind of get it back to it is probably 80 to 90% of normal strength.
Awesome. Gregory from Academy of Science would like to know, what is cartilage made of?
There's a number of different cells that make up the cartilage, and really important, you'll find cartilage in sort of like your knees and your joints and things like that, and they're there to ensure that the bones and everything are held together so that they can keep them kind of moving, everything like that. There is a number of different cell types that have to go back and check, Gregory, in terms of what those are. They're not coming to me right now.
Some questions from Mila, who is also part of our Academy of Science Club. She would like to know, how do you stop hiccups?
How do you stop hiccups? Well, I can tell you first, they're frustrating when you get them, and you're holding, so you can hold your breath, drink of water. Some people say if somebody gives you a fright or a scare, that will cause the hiccups to go. And then there's sometimes where you feel like your hiccups will never go away, and then they just miraculously just go away. It's just the air bubble, and so there's a number of different ways to sort of try and get them to go, but most people, it's drinking or holding your breath.
It truly is the age-old question. Another one from Mila. She would like to know, why do you see stars when you push on your eyes?
So, obviously when you push on your eyes, there's a lot of things behind your eyes in terms of being able to see in different colors and things like that. So just the pressure alone causes a reaction that you can see stars. The other thing you can do when you close your eyes is, and I'm going to close my eyes here now, and sometimes if you look at a light, you can actually see red, and really that you can almost see the blood vessels, and that's what you're actually seeing on your eyelid, on the inside.
Absolutely. So you touched on this a little bit before, but Orion from our Cyber Chase camp would like to know, are there such things as white blood cells?
Yes, there are definitely such things as white blood cells, and we can see them here as in the demonstration that I did. And as I said, the white blood cells around are really important. There are many different cell types in addition to the ones that I talked about here today that are found in blood. But the three main ones are your red ones, which are carrying your oxygen and your nutrients, your platelets, which are there for sort of clot formation against cuts and scrapes, and then, as you asked, the white blood cells. And when we're healthy and there's nothing wrong with us, our white blood cells are much less than our red blood cells. But as we get the cold or the flu or some sort of infection like that, the number of white blood cells that you would find if we were to test your blood would go up.
Great, and that is all the questions we have for you, Dr. Payne. Thank you so much for answering our club members' questions and all the ones that we got submitted on social media as well.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Thank you for taking time on your Friday afternoon to be with me. I hope that this was informative to you, and your questions were outstanding. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
All right, so that is all that we have for you guys today. I would like to say another huge thank you to Dr. Payne for joining us today with these awesome experiments and teaching us a little bit more about the heart. I hope that you guys learned as much as I did. I sure learned a lot there. So we would like to say thank you to everyone watching from home as well. You can tune in every Friday on our Facebook to see some awesome faculty members from UNBC. We only have 3 more Fridays left, so don't miss out. Also, if you're between 6 and 12 years old and you love science, check out our activity clubs. They are free for the rest of the summer, but spots are filling up fast, so make sure to get in there if you would like to. And that's all that we have for you, so thanks for coming, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye!